Hello and welcome to This Is Not an Episode, a bi-weekly podcast about where philosophy meets the world, quietly, awkwardly, and sometimes all too loudly. Each episode explores how philosophical ideas surface in public life, from fashion and faith to AI and funding policies. Who are we? Well, I'm Jonathan Tallant. I'm a philosopher from the University of Nottingham. Andy, who are you?
I'm Andy Fisher, also a philosopher and professor in Nottingham University.
Good stuff, Andy. What have you been up to this week?
Oh, well, most exciting thing was I was stung by a bee in my mouth.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so that's pretty impressive feat. So
You
that
understand that
wasn't
you're not
good.
supposed to chew them. You're not supposed to try and eat them.
That's it. Yeah, that is it. New diet of bees. No, I was cycling home, as you do, and I had my mouth open and it just flew in and stung me. So when I got home, I gave some tweezers to my daughter and said, "Can you pull this sting out my cheek, please?" It was like going to the dentist. It felt like that. But yeah, I did some other things this week, but that was something just in the forefront of my mind, as these things tend to be. What about yourself, Jonathan?
Nasty. Well, I hope you're doing all right, and perhaps stay off the vitamin B diet.
Oh, gosh.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm all right, thanks. Probably highlight of my week was probably dropping in to see you yesterday. For folks who tune in, Andy and I work very close together on university campus, but given meetings and everything else going on, we don't often actually get to hang out and have a chat, which was actually one of the reasons for the podcast. So, yeah, very nice to see you and have a bit of a catch up in person.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan. That's very kind of you. Very kind indeed.
Well, I thought after the vitamin B joke, I'd better put something
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
But it's a bit, speaking of being on university campuses and obviously working with students, you've been reading about the most important skill college students should learn. What's all this about, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually a video, and it's a video of Jeffrey Kaplan, who is a philosopher and has done some excellent videos on lots of topics on YouTube. And he's giving a sort of graduation speech in Williams College, and he's outlining to them why philosophers and humanities and liberal arts is a really good degree. And he's a brilliant storyteller. And his story basically is of a flight, and this flight is by a pilot called de Crespigny, and the pilot, and it sort of gets into real trouble very quickly after takeoff. And the story is about him giving different facts at different points. Like, oh, actually, the plane has holes in its wings because of this thing, and etc. And the passengers are calm and happy throughout this tumultuous time. And his point is that what was really good was that he had the ability to give reasons. So he didn't just say, "You are safe," and try to persuade them through, PR or spin. He just said, "Look, this is what's happening. I'm an expert." And that was enough. And he also said that when they landed, they had to be on the runway for over an hour, I think, with no air conditioning. And at the end, he took questions from the passengers, and the passengers were like, "Why did we spend? I know. Why did we spend an hour on the runway?" And he just said, he laid out lots of facts and kept answering questions like, "Well, there was lots of fuel on the runway, etc., etc." And they left very happy. And a passenger interviewed afterwards said they were very, very happy with the everybody. They were happy with the airline. I mean, happy with the airline. But this was a sort of potentially life-death situation in the air. But because he could marshal certain facts in the right way, he provided reasons, and this sort of made the people happy. And he was basically saying that's what's the skills for humanities, philosophers, liberal arts students, is about marshalling those reasons and giving people, not trying to persuade them by rhetoric, but giving them good reasons so they feel full up, as he said, sort of happy. You can. One thing he said was you can change people's minds, which actually, if you think about it, is quite an amazing thing. You change people's ideologies, outlooks, etc. So it's very well worth a listen. Very engaging storyteller. Is a really good communicator. I have bits of reservations what it said, but I thought it was a very good talk and something worth listening to.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That really reminds me of a lot of what's going on in I guess, user acceptance of artificial intelligence space, whether that's autonomous vehicles or things like ChatGPT and other things, where there's this real push for explainable AI. And it does seem to be that people are, I mean, not quite infinitely, but significantly more satisfied with things when the artificial intelligence or the LLM can articulate reasons for actions. It does seem like there's something quite powerful baked in there that makes a big difference to people, but particularly in those kind of person to person environments, like when there's a pilot flying a plane and you're worried you're going to
Yes.
die.
Yeah, absolutely. And he has this funny bit at the end where he said, imagine that the sort of like airport PR person came out and talked to them and said, we really appreciate that, we want you to be safe. And he said, that's not particularly helpful. We want to know why we are safe and why we shouldn't get off the plane on the runway. So that answering the why question was, yeah, really, really, really powerful. And he says that giving reasons, he says, is the most underrated intellectual capacity that exists. So I thought that was quite a strong claim. As I said,
That's very strong.
Obviously there's a context. The context is you've got parents and people graduating, and he wants them to go away with a sort of spring in their step. Yeah, I did, like I said, I did have some reservations about it, but yeah, it was interesting.
Nice. Well, I mean, certainly, if any discipline is geared up to at least try to provide reasons for things, it's certainly going to be philosophy.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what wasn't clear to me was whether it was about communicating well rather than reasons. And actually, what was he was really? I mean, ironically, what he was doing was very, very satisfying, but not because he gave us lots of reasons, because he was just a really good communicator. He had emotional intelligence, about timing, etc. So I guess if the pilot came on in a very panicked voice and said the same facts, or if you're in a different context, or if he wasn't in a position of power, or whatever, then there was the reasons look like they're just not going to do the job that he thinks they were going to do. They did, sorry, in the exact case. So there's a lot built into it. In a vacuum, this is what we talked about last episode, in a sense. In a vacuum, reasons seem to do the job, but actually we don't live in a vacuum. And actually the supposed status quo is just enshrining certain power and certain all these other things. So yeah, I think there's something true about it, of course, but I think it's done in a vacuum. Yeah. But I mean, in terms of reasons, I think giving reasons is important. And you're reading something about weighing up reasons about future of AI and stuff, weren't you?
Yeah, so this was an article in Time that caught my attention, and the author basically, and I'll do a little bit of setup,
Yeah.
wants to suggest that how we think about the impending, already with us, rise of AI is really reminiscent of Pascal's wager. So, not to assume that everyone who's listening to this knows what Pascal's wager is. The idea is that this is a bet on whether or not God exists, and then is used to try and get folks who are reading it to actually say, yes, okay, I should believe in God. That's the general setup. The basic idea just goes like this. Either God does exist or God doesn't exist. If God exists and you believe that God exists, well, that's infinite benefit to you, right? It's not just there's a little bit of upside here. This is infinite benefit, an eternity of living with God with all of the attendant upsides. If God exists and you don't believe, let's just assume there's a modest downside, right? If God doesn't exist and you believe, modest downside. And if God doesn't exist and you believe that God doesn't exist, then perhaps modest upside or neutral or something like this. And the whole point of Pascal's wager is that it's that infinity of upside in that first box that really makes it, well, you've just got to believe in God, because when you weigh up all those different benefits and costs, it's so clearly overpowering, right? No matter what the probability of God's existence, if there is an infinity, well, no matter the probability of God's existence, as long as it's non-infinitely small or zero, that benefit just becomes infinitely large, and so that just outweighs all of the other options. Okay, that's Pascal's wager. What the author then talks about is stuff like, look, AI is coming. If you don't get with it, there are going to be some big downsides. If AI is coming and you do get with it, there are going to be some big upsides. Now that's cool. And the author doesn't say that these are completely the same, right? They say that there's an analogy between Pascal's wager and this. But I just found myself going, hang on a minute, this is just decision theory in the case of the AI discussion, right? You weigh up the various different probabilities, you draw up your cost benefit matrix, you then try and apportion, try and make a decision that looks rational in light of that. The Pascal's wageriness of it is entirely to do with that infinite benefit outweighing everything. Um, and so I was sort of struck with what's the wager actually doing here? I don't. So I was at once delighted to see some philosophy in the news, and then also going, I don't quite get it. But I'm not sure if you think I'm being grossly unfair to the author there.
No, not at all. Not at all. I guess the question I have for you then is, do you think the conclusion is right? So I guess the conclusion being it's rational given all the things we know and the supposed massive change that AI would bring about, automated vehicles, all that sort of stuff, to prepare now for it and upskill ourselves now. Totally take your point that it's not the infinite weighing doesn't work. But do you think, if you're at a meeting convincing people to spend time and money on upskilling in these areas and thinking they're planning cities and all that sort of stuff, do you think there's a good enough reason to make them divert those resources there?
Yeah, I do. I extract all of the Pascal's wager stuff from this and just talk about it in straightforward decision theoretic terms. I think we're already seeing quite a lot of upsides coming from some bits of AI. I know that lots of AI implementations are costing money. They're not actually delivering what people were hoping for. So I'm not an AI maximalist at this stage, but I do think that there are significant improvements to workflows, ways that you can get benefits and advances from integrating AI into things that help things. And I think, it's like any other tool. I wouldn't say to folks these days, no, I don't think you should learn how to use Microsoft because you could just write everything down with paper and pen and use your calculator for the math side of things. That would seem to be unduly obstinate and pig-headed in face of the technology we have in front of us. So I think that's an important bit of upskilling. In exactly the same way, I think it's important to upskill and to start to embed the infrastructure without rushing headlong into we have to do everything through it, but to recognize that there are these upsides and to start moving with the technology. That would be my view. I don't know where you would sit with that.
Yeah, it seems right. I think, and there's a sort of there's a point where the reasoning just stops, isn't it? So you can imagine those cases where we just get people to be AI literate on, chatbots, whatever. But in cases where we're asking people, we're sort of introducing universal income for because of job losses and things, then you've got some big commitments, and at that point, we just have to do it case by case. I think thinking about it is really obviously it's really important, but yeah, I know. I also wonder whether this might generalize to other future things as well. So something about the climate, etc. We don't seem to be very good at doing things now about that. Um, yeah, and also I was struck by the fact obviously a connection to the Kaplan video about reasons and stuff, because it's no good just telling, and I know if you tell a group of, room full of people in a meeting, you're irrational if you don't do this, that's going to fly about as well, probably better than the plane that was, but not very well. But so it's about communications about as much as the reasons on that. Yeah, so I sort of get the point, but I don't think it goes as far as they think it's going to go.
No, I think that that's right. And for my own part, I tend to see lots of these things a bit like a probability distribution. There are various different outcomes that we could get in cases of climate, in cases of AI. So some are more likely than others. Align that probability distribution of outcomes with expected utility or disutility. Give yourself a rough map, how bad it is if some of these small probability things come out. Okay, well, let's think through what we might do in advance. Let's do that horizon scanning. Let's not just go, we're just going to do things the same as we've always done them. But let's not necessarily just rush blindly into things, because I think that there are all of these possible upsides. We should explore them. We should think about them to try and get the possible benefit from them, including, I notice, in the most elegant segue in the history of the universe, possible benefits from pastoral AI.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, what's the opposite of benefit? Disbenefits, bad things from. Yeah, I was reading a really interesting article by Kieran Felon, and it's on the unrecognized potential worry around AI chatbots. So AI chatbots, companion bots, are those things that talk to you about, your personal relationships, role play, romantic relationships, sexual relationships, give you talks to pep talks, all this sort of stuff. And they're growing in use exponentially. So you might think, well, that seems quite good in some ways, because if there's a queue for 4 years to talk to a counsellor and you can get some good advice from a chatbot, then go for it if that's going to make life easier for you. But he makes a good point that, well, first off, the supposed guardrails that are there only work in regulated companies. But as markets scramble for this, they're going to deregulate and have workarounds. So the guardrails aren't going to be there. And in fact, there are cases now court cases where the chatbots have said some really outlandish and horrific things. So they give an example of a made up drug addict called Penro who, after about 500 exchanges, it says to them they really should start taking drugs again, even though, so things like that. And
it's a bold move for the chatbot there.
Absolutely. And there are lots of cases of things which are on the cusp and some really bad stuff that have gone to court. So there's a problem guardrails. There's also, I think this is the main worry that we might have, is that they're built to be addictive.
Yeah.
So they have, how does that work? Well, it has that sort of sycophant nature of them. Like, oh, what a great question, Andy. I hope you should really do this. You are brilliant. All that sort of stuff. And of course, there's a sort of feedback loop so that you just do more of the stuff that's giving you that good, it's like thumbs up, likes. And of course, that's going to be problematic because it becomes addictive. And you give your decision making, your sort of personal relationship, your companionship offline, and it's just more and more appealing to do so.
Yeah.
And then the final point, which is particularly relevant to us, is that actually there's no discussion of this that he thinks is obvious in higher education. So students, for example, report 92% being lonely students in universities, but only 43% say that they would be happy to discuss that with anyone else.
Wow.
So that is obviously a problem, and there's an increase in mental health issues, etc., and there's a stretch of resources in mental health well-being across the sector. That's just a recipe for some serious problems. So of course, one way that the universities could push and students would find themselves is using these things. But we don't really know what's gone into them. We're not sure of guardrails and what they're using and how much they're using them, and they're addictive. Yeah. So all that stuff is potentially worrying. And he's saying, look, human relationships are really valuable, etc. But what he's saying, which is I think is really important in the conversations in universities, and I guess in FE colleges and schools, there's a lot of discussion about whether you should use it for written work assessment. But they don't bring in like support and wellbeing teams or counselling teams or support services for students. But of course, if he's right, and he is right, there should be those people in those conversations to say, well, actually, we need to be mindful of, students discussions in halls or whatever. So I think that's a good wake up call and something that should be at the forefront of our minds. And I don't think it is much.
No, I think that you're right, and it's a really interesting point. I want to pursue the point with you a little bit, and then there's a sort of slightly devil's advocate position I want to just explore with you in a bit as well. But if you ruled the world, Andy, how do we have that conversation? How do we structure it? What are we driving through a process?
Yes, that's a really good question. So I think we need to do two things. What? Okay, so I'm ruling the world, so I'm going to say I've got loads of money and
Total
resources.
control. Yeah. Infinite
Excellent.
resource. Just
Okay.
ideal state. What are you going to do?
Okay. So first, So I think this may be naive that actually students probably want to talk to other people about this. So I just max out resources in universities and colleges. So I'm going to get bigger support and wellbeing teams, some bigger counselling services, so that students, if they want to talk about it, they're not stuck and then turn to chatbots, etc., chat companions.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing I'd do. The other is I would. Universities are now having online sort of onboarding modules around AI, literacy, plagiarism, all that sort of stuff. So build into that just things that tell students about that. And equally, I wouldn't say don't use these things because I think that's naive. But I would skill them and saying, look, do talk to people as well, and here are some people to talk to. So good signposting, good resourcing, and I guess training in character development, and when to look for resources and when to look for proper human sort of interaction.
Cool. So you've kind of taken the sting out of my devil's advocate position now, but I want to explore it with you anyway. So just sort of reflecting on the general way that people have responded to the rise of AI, and there's a lot of enthusiasm, but there's also a lot of this is kind of unfair, but a lot of hand wringing, a lot of worry, a lot of, oh my goodness, this is terrible stuff. And I get it. But here's the pushback that I don't quite believe, but I just wanted to see what you made of. Imagine that we didn't have fire. Right, fire. We're back in the Stone Age. We've got lots of other structures like the social structures that we have now, but there's no fire, right? And then suddenly we discover fire, tech fire, because suddenly the technology companies are all over it, right? And they're, oh, well, we can introduce fire, and it's brilliant because, well, what can you do with it? You can generate heat and you can generate light. This is amazing. Look at what we can do with this. But it turns out, Andy, I don't know if you knew this, but fire has some downsides. Fire can be very damaging both to individuals and groups if it's not properly regulated and controlled. And fire is, in a sense, addictive in that people like being warm and they like being able to see things. And I guess there's probably some kind of deep wired connection to want to be warm. So maybe we could say that it's sort of similarly addictive. But look, fundamentally, fire is kind of important. I mean, maybe not now, right? But you get the general direction of travel with all of this. So to what extent do you think that that's a fair provocation? And given the way that fire's pretty important, we didn't try and nanny people through the adoption of fire. Maybe we just need to back off a little bit on nannying people through AI. I don't know even what I think of that as a line, but over to you.
I have one word for you: arsonists. No, I think I think in some sense you answered your own question, and I could see you trying your best on it. But there are regulations. We've done mandatory fire training, and there's a whole set of building regs if you're going to have gas in your house and all that stuff. And fire, although I can sort of see it's addictive, it doesn't have that proactive, user feedback loop where it would change to, it'd be like the fire saying, "Oh, you're great. Can I make you warm, please?" It's like I can come with you to the paper factory, that sort of thing. And so I think, obviously there needs regulation in these things, but I think under education in it. So I think the analogy breaks down a bit on that, but I can sort of see where you're going, and I do think people are people, as obviously people are people. We need to trust them a lot, and they've got brains, and if people want to do things that make themselves ill or hurt themselves, then whatever, up to a point, people jump off things with parachutes and all that sort of stuff. But I do think we need to at least think through this stuff. And I guess that ties into the last thing you were saying. We need to think through now where we might be going. And I guess one of the problems with something being like a sycophantic in the response is that you'll never change your mind in what you do because you're never going to be challenged at all. And but that sort of under that sort of never changing your mind is a real problem, I think, isn't it, Jonathan? You've read something on this.
Oh, love it, Andy. That's smooth, buttery smooth. Yeah. So the thing that another thing I was reading this week was a piece, and again we'll link to all of these things in the notes. At the Big Think around great thinkers who rejected their ideas, and I think the premise for the article is that we don't really see great thinkers changing their minds very much, particularly in philosophy. It's really surprising, it's really notable, and also maybe kind of bad, right? Because you would think that with all of these brilliant people working right at the top of their game, you should be expecting to see changes left, right, and centre. And maybe that reflects something pernicious in the state of philosophy. Really interesting line. I just have so many questions. Um, So I think this idea, which I think is at the core of the article around epistemic humility and being responsive to reasons, and we're back with Jeff Kaplan at the start, is good, right? You should be receptive to reasons, you should reflect on your views, and you should change them when the evidence becomes compelling. But the thing in the Big Think article, it says, why is it so surprising when people change their mind? It says, well, look, here are all of these notable thinkers through history have changed their minds, like Augustine and Wittgenstein and Kant and Marx and Simone Weil. And I'm going, hang on a minute, that's quite a lot of people who've changed their minds. And then I started thinking through other folks who changed their minds on issues, like David Lewis and Jonathan Lowe. And I mean, Putnam is referenced in some of the links, and Quine changed his mind on some stuff. I go, so hang on, what? It's not surprising when great thinkers do it because we do it all the time. This is just really, really regular. Um, in some ways, as I say, these are I'm presenting them more as pushback, but I guess I experienced them as more as questions that I really wanted to dig into with the author of the article and the people who'd written the research that was sort of being referenced. But one of the things that got me was that they talked about philosophers not changing their theories so often. Um, and okay, let's suppose that they're right, despite the evidence that I've just pushed. I don't necessarily think in philosophy it's the theories that matter that much. It's the arguments. Do you believe that this argument is persuasive? Do you believe that that argument works? And that's our stock in trade as philosophers, right? Good arguments, good explanations. And I think people acknowledge that their arguments are overturned all the time because you see a reply piece come out, there's no response, and we move on in the debate. Um, and I just wondered how much the authors then were looking in the wrong place for that change of mind stuff. And there was something else I wanted to talk about as well, but I just wondered what you made of all of that. I mean, do we change our mind as philosophers?
Uh, well, I thought one thing, but you've made me change my mind. I actually thought it was quite perceptive. I thought in the sense that I thought before talking to you that people were a bit more dogmatic, and the part of the article that really made me think was people build their whole careers on a particular position. So Quine has his view on ontology or whatever, and that's a Quinean view. So it's like they're sort of captured in that view, and it would be very hard, I guess, in some instances to go back on that because you're invited to talk in conferences because you're that type of person. And I can see therefore there is motivation to just keep confirmation bias, always like everything is going to support my view irrespective of what people do and argue. But you made me really think that actually on the grounds people do change their views more than we think. And I guess they might change their views a lot before they publish something as well. So we're only seeing what's out there, but they might. You've probably had this experience. I've had the experience. You're writing about something and you go, yes, this is right. And then you read something and you think, oh, that's the last 2 months. It's gotten out of the window. And then you write something else. So perhaps that's it. I don't know. Yeah, what do you think about that identity and sort of way of part of the discipline, the systems of philosophy, academic philosophy, perpetuating that?
I think there is something to that, and if that's what the authors are driving at, I think there's a nugget in there that I think is right. And I'm reminded of when I first came to Nottingham. David Armstrong, great Australian metaphysician, was with us for a period of time. And he was giving talks around a book that he'd not long published around truth making and universals. And what I found notable talking to him, and I think you can read it in his 2004 Truth and Truth Making, there are places where he's changed his mind on things, even in there. Um, but the big system was still the one that he was looking to try and defend. But what he changed his mind on were which arguments worked and some of the details and some of the nuance. And I guess it depends where we look and what we prioritize. And you could be right, right? Once you're in a system, that's the system that you get identified with. That's the one that you gotta keep trucking with. But I did wonder a bit, do you keep trucking with it to see whether it works, or do you keep trucking with it because because you believe it? And I wasn't sure. I mean, it would be brilliant to do some qualitative research with philosophers. Team
Just
up with
writing
some
this down.
Yeah. Team up with some psychologists and actually work with a large group and see, do you believe your view? Do you change it? In fact, there might already be some out there. But just super interesting to explore that. But the other thing I wondered about, I mean, this sort of came from a look at philosophers and they're changing their minds. I think it's pretty notable when anyone in an academic discipline changes their mind on something, isn't it? So is this actually anything to do with philosophy or just intellectuals or academics or researchers? I don't know if you have a view on that.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think it has particular bite in philosophy for the reasons that the Jeff Kaplan thinks. We're meant to be super aware of reasons, very good at marshalling it, and very humble in just going with the most weighty reasons, the best arguments.
Have you ever met philosophers, Andy?
I did say meant to be.
meant to. Yeah.
So I can therefore see why it has a particular, bite in that context. But you're right, and it'd be very interesting to know whether physicists change their mind and how they change their mind and these sort of questions. I know you've done stuff on intuition, which I think is really interesting in science, and how that plays a bigger role than people like to admit.
Yes, there's some fun research exploring the role of intuitions in science. As you say, suggests it's larger than we normally give it credit for better or for worse. And certainly when I've presented that research to physicists, they've not necessarily been delighted. But it's all part of that big question about how everything hangs together. How do disciplines work? And this is the article I was reading this week, just a part of that around changing identity, changing view. How does all of that come together? I'm really conscious. I've been really critical of the things that I've been talking about this week. I think they're both really interesting provocations. Yes. I'm a philosopher. I want to know more. I want to challenge. I want to get stuck into things and to understand them.
Absolutely. I think the take home thing for me today is that there's actually a big difference, and it's obvious, but a big difference between how the non-philosophy outside world sees philosophy and how it actually sees itself. And I can see why, because to understand the fine-grained distinctions and stuff in philosophy and how we actually work, you can't write a paper on that. It's going to be boring, but it's going to be easier to have these sort of soundbitey type things. And I think that's true in lots of these things. Like philosophers think this, and they think that, and this happens, but actually on the ground it's different. So I guess all disciplines are going to have that sort of mismatch between how society generally sees them and what they're actually like.
I'm sure you're right. And as you say, that's a nice take home message for us to be closing in on for this episode. So thank you to everybody for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you have, give it a monstrously high rating wherever you're listening to this. And don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, we'll be keeping an eye on what's going on in the world of philosophy. And we'll be back soon to talk to you about all of our, as ever, incredibly insightful reflections. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.